Back in the day, the Hells Angels and the Rizzuto crime family were basically running the show. They teamed up and ruled the streets, taking over everything from drug deals and extortion to money laundering. But, as usual with these kinds of shady partnerships, it didn't last forever. Greed, betrayal, and pressure from the cops turned their alliance bloody, kicking off a violent turf war that would change Montreal's criminal scene for good. By the 1980s, Vito Rizzuto was in charge of Montreal's mafia. He wasn't like the old-school mob bosses who wanted to keep things in the family. Vito was more of a modern gangster, open to teaming up with other crime groups instead of going to war with them. One of those groups was the Hells Angels. They were no longer just a rowdy biker gang. They were turning into a full-on criminal enterprise, running a massive drug operation with cocaine and meth pouring into the streets. The Rizzutos had strong connections with South American cartels, and the Hells Angels had the muscle to move the drugs on the streets. Together, they built one of the biggest and richest drug empires in Canada, spreading their reach from Montreal to Toronto and beyond. But they weren't the only ones in the game. The Rock Machine Motorcycle Club didn't want to play second fiddle and challenged the Hells Angels for control. This kicked off one of the deadliest biker wars in history, the Quebec Biker War, from 1994 to 2002. More than 160 people were killed, including bystanders and even police. The Rizzuto family backed the Hells Angels with cash and contacts, helping them outgun and outnumber the Rock Machine. Eventually, the Hells Angels wiped out their rivals and took over Quebec's drug trade completely. But all that bloodshed also drew major attention from law enforcement. Once the Rock Machine was out of the picture, the Hells Angels and the Rizzutos had full control. The Mafia handled the global supply lines, bringing in cocaine from South America and heroin from Europe. The Hells Angels took care of the local stuff, street sales, collecting money, and keeping people in line. It all ran like a business, with people managing logistics, cleaning the money through legit companies, and dealing with problems quickly, and often violently. They were making millions, but their success didn't go unnoticed. In 2006, the RCMP and other police forces launched a huge takedown called Operation Colisée. Dozens of top mafia figures were arrested, including Vito Rizzuto himself. He ended up getting extradited to the US for his part in a 1981 triple murder in New York. With Vito behind bars, the alliance between the Hells Angels and the Mafia started falling apart. The bikers, no longer under Mafia control, began making power plays of their own. At the same time, cracks appeared in the Rizzuto family. Members started turning on each other. Vito's father, Nicola Rizzuto, was killed in his own home in 2010. Others were gunned down on the streets. By the time Vito got out of prison in 2012, the empire he built was in shambles. His allies were dead. The Hells Angels had become more independent, and new gangs were fighting for control. Vito tried to pull things back together, but in 2013, he died suddenly, officially of natural causes, though many believe he was poisoned. Without Vito, the Rizzuto crime family collapsed, and a brutal power struggle took over Montreal's underworld. The Hells Angels, the remaining Mafia members, and new street gangs have all been fighting for a piece of the action. But now, the police are watching closer than ever and working hard to shut it all down. Meanwhile, over on the US East Coast, another deadly alliance had been brewing between the Pagans Motorcycle Club and the Philadelphia Mafia. These two groups were some of the scariest names in organized crime across Pennsylvania, New Jersey, and Maryland. The Pagans started in Maryland back in 1959, and by the 70s, they had a fearsome rep. Unlike the Hells Angels, they never went global. They kept things local, but deadly. The Philly Mob, also known as the Bruno Scarfo family, had a tight grip on loan sharking, gambling, drug sales, and shaking down businesses. Normally, traditional mafia bosses kept their distance from biker gangs, but not this time. The Pagans and the Philly Mob saw benefits in teaming up. It was a secret but deadly partnership. The mob brought in the cash flow, and the Pagans brought the muscle. The mob would pressure bars and clubs for protection money, and if someone didn't pay, the Pagans would handle it. Beatings, arson, threats. And they didn't mess around. These guys were known for going way over the top. Their wild and unpredictable nature made them perfect for enforcing the mob's threats without raising immediate red flags. By the 90s and early 2000s, the cops started noticing more cases where pagans were pulling off brutal attacks for the Philly mob. Business owners who didn't pay up found their bars torched, cars smashed, or ended up in hospital. On top of that, the pagans were big in the meth trade, making and moving large amounts across the region. It made both groups tons of money, but it also painted a huge target on their backs. The Philly mob and the Pagans MC, not exactly your friendly neighborhood biker club and local business association. These two groups teamed up to build one of the East Coast's most dangerous and profitable drug networks. The mob brought in the product, with connections to South American cocaine suppliers and a long history of heroin smuggling. The Pagans, they handled the street-level action, making sure the drugs made it into hands and pockets across the region. Drug money didn't just sit around. It got laundered through a mix of shady businesses, strip clubs, nightclubs, car dealerships, all fronts for the mob. The Pagans had their own setup too, using biker bars, tattoo parlors, and other cash-heavy spots to keep their profits looking clean. For a while, this kept both groups flying under the radar. But like most criminal partnerships, it wasn't all smooth riding. The alliance between the Pagans and the Philly mob had its cracks. Arguments over drug money, debts, and personal beefs sometimes turned ugly. There were rumors of Pagans ripping off mafia shipments, which, unsurprisingly, led to savage beatings and even suspected killings. One of the biggest betrayals came in the 2000s, when a few top Pagan members flipped and started talking. Their testimonies exposed everything: drug deals, extortion rackets, murder plots, and just how closely the Pagans and the mob were working together. By the late 2000s and early 2010s, the feds had enough dirt to go all in. Big RICO cases were launched, targeting both groups. In 2001, a major bust saw 73 Pagans arrested, revealing how deep their ties to the mafia really ran. Meanwhile, the Philly mob, already weakened by snitches and internal fights, took another hit. Then came 2011, a major blow to the Pagans when their national vice president, Floyd Jesse Moore, turned informant. He spilled everything, triggering a wave of convictions. Some members ran, some went underground, and others ended up working with the feds. Even with all that heat, neither group vanished. The Pagans rebuilt behind closed doors, more careful, less flashy, but still active. The Philly Mafia, now led by Joey Merlino, is still around too, but not as powerful as it once was. Their old-school biker mob alliance has mostly faded. But in the world of organized crime, history tends to repeat itself. If the timing's right, the next generation could pick up where the last one left off. For now, what's left behind is a violent legacy that proves just how dangerous and profitable things can get when outlaw bikers and the mob join forces. And it's not just Philly. These biker mafia alliances stretch across the globe. Outlaw motorcycle clubs, OMCs, and traditional mafia families have long been involved in some seriously shady stuff. Drug and weapons trafficking, extortion, even murder for hire. The DEA, FBI, and ATF have spent decades trying to bring them down, launching some of the biggest undercover operations in law enforcement history. One of the most famous was Operation Black Biscuit, aimed at the Hells Angels in Arizona. Federal agents went deep undercover, pretending to be members of a small biker club called Solo Angeles MC, which had links to the Hells Angels. One agent, Jay Dobbins, aka Jay Bird, spent 2 years playing the part, staging crimes, faking murders, and cutting illegal weapons deals to gain trust. The result? Hours of hidden camera footage, wiretaps, and inside info that blew the lid off the Hells Angels operations. In 2003, over 50 members and associates were arrested on RICO charges, weapons trafficking, and murder plots. It hit their Arizona chapter hard and showed just how far law enforcement was willing to go. Meanwhile, the Philly mob wasn't done catching heat. In 2012, the DEA rolled out Operation Trojan Horse, a sting targeting the Philly Mafia's dealings with outlaw bikers. Undercover agents posed as drug dealers and secretly recorded meetings between high-ranking Pagans and Mafia bosses. They captured plans for drug and gun deals, and discovered the Pagans were acting as enforcers, collecting debts and carrying out beatings for the mob. By 2013, more than 30 members from both groups had been arrested, including Philly underboss Joseph Mousy Massimino and top Pagan enforcers. the operation seriously damaged their criminal network. But the biker mafia connection isn't just a North American thing, it's global. In Spain, the Hells Angels teamed up with local mafia families, running massive cocaine and hash smuggling routes across Europe, South America, and North Africa. In 2010, Operation Shovel blew the lid off their empire. Agents went undercover and caught Hells Angels leaders making deals with cartel reps and mafia figures. The raids led to 30-plus arrests, the seizure of millions in assets, over 500 kilograms of cocaine, luxury cars, weapons, the whole lot. Then there's Brazil, where the Bandidos MC joined forces with Italy's Ndrangheta Mafia to smuggle drugs and weapons between continents. Operation Cavaleiros do Asfalto, Knights of the Asphalt, followed the trail of cocaine from Brazil's cartels to Europe's streets, with the Bandidos handling distribution and the Mafia laundering the money. In 2018, joint raids in Brazil and Italy took down over 40 members of both groups. They also seized large drug shipments, guns, and piles of cash. The operation showed just how massive and dangerous these criminal partnerships can get. Operation Rough Rider was one of the earliest and most ambitious DEA crackdowns on outlaw biker gangs in America. Launched in the 1980s, it didn't just target one group. It hit nearly all the big names: the Hells Angels, Bandidos, Outlaws, and Mongols. Undercover agents went deep, posing as drug buyers and weapons traffickers to gain access to biker networks moving massive loads of shady meth, cocaine, and PCP across the U.S. The agents didn't just find drugs, they uncovered a powder keg of violence. Investigations revealed internal wars between clubs, revenge killings, and even assassination orders between rival factions. When the dust settled in 1987, Operation Rough Rider had led to over 130 arrests nationwide, and law enforcement seized millions in drugs, cash, and illegal weapons. It was the largest biker-related drug bust in U.S. history, and it seriously disrupted outlaw motorcycle club operations for years. But despite the hits, these clubs, and their ties to the mafia, never really went away. Instead, they adapted. Undercover stings like Rough Rider, Black Biscuit, and Trojan Horse exposed just how deep the connections ran between outlaw bikers, traditional mafia families, and global drug cartels. While law enforcement took down some of the most powerful figures in the scene, both sides of the biker mafia alliance learned from the busts. New faces, new tactics, and a tighter lid on operations followed. The message was clear. As long as there's money to be made in drugs, guns, and extortion, outlaw bikers and the mafia will find ways to work together. And the DEA, they're still watching. Now, let's rewind to one of the most feared men in Hells Angels history, Michael Irish O Farerrell. Born June 2nd, 1949, in Los Angeles, California, Michael O Farerrell, known simply as Irish, was destined for life on two wheels. His outlaw journey began with the Night Riders MC in Glendale, but it didn't take long for his name to make headlines. In August 1972, O Farerrell and several Night Riders were convicted for the brutal assault of a 15-year-old girl, a crime that earned him his first major conviction and hardened his street rep. Soon after, the Night Riders were absorbed into the Hells Angels, forming the LA County chapter during a heated war with the Vagos MC. O Farerrell's rise within the Angels was swift, thanks to his violent reputation and brawling skills. By the late 70s, he was part of the Oakland chapter, considered the unofficial heart of the Hells Angels empire. While locked up in San Quentin, O Farerrell asked to be officially transferred to Oakland, a request that was initially denied. But once released, he got his wish, and quickly made an impact. One infamous incident sealed his legacy. He got into a fight with Vincent Big Vinny Girolamo, the New York Hells Angels Sergeant-at-Arms. O Farerrell beat him so badly that Girolamo later died from a ruptured spleen, an event that only added to Irish's fearsome legend. In the early 1980s, with Sonny Barger recovering from throat cancer surgery, O Farerrell stepped in as acting president of the Oakland chapter. Despite growing heat from law enforcement, he publicly denied any link between the Hells Angels and organized crime. But the feds weren't buying it. By 1987, Operation Rough Rider had uncovered enough dirt to bring O Farerrell and Barger down. Both were arrested, along with 11 other Angels, on a laundry list of charges, narcotics, weapons, explosives, and conspiracy. The operation had been helped by Anthony Tate, a key informant inside the club, and revealed a criminal empire hiding beneath the chrome and leather. In 1988, O Farerrell was convicted of conspiracy and sentenced to 3.5 years in prison. But just before reporting to serve his time, tragedy struck. On June 6, 1989, O Farerrell was ambushed and murdered, stabbed multiple times and shot 4 times, by a member of the Aryan Brotherhood. The killing was believed to be part of a turf war between the Aryan Brotherhood and the Hells Angels in California's East Bay. His funeral was massive, over 1,000 attendees, including his wife and son, all there to pay tribute to a man who was both feared and respected. 2 Aryan Brotherhood members, Aaron Jerry Marsh and Michael Bruce Tank Shepard, were arrested for the murder. Marsh was later strangled to death in prison, and Shepard committed suicide in his cell. Enter Dwight Big D Mushy. Born in 1968 in Winnipeg, Canada, Dwight Mushy, known as Big D, was a larger-than-life figure with a lethal edge. Of Iranian and Filipino descent, he towered at 6 feet 3 inches and held a second-degree black belt in Taekwondo. Although he dabbled in pro kickboxing and boxing, it wasn't the ring where he made his name. It was in the underworld. Mushy's first conviction came from dealing meth in Winnipeg, which launched a career in crime. Journalist Peter Edwards described him as a charismatic but dangerous figure who modeled himself after Sonny Crockett from Miami Vice, complete with slick Italian suits and an intimidating presence. Unlike the usual tall tales that float around outlaw circles, Mushy's reputation for violence was very real. He was rumored to be a contract killer for the Rizzuto crime family, operating between Montreal and New York. Despite his criminal ties, Mushy had a successful front. He owned a home in Winnipeg's upscale River Heights and ran a tight crew. He was also accused of smuggling meth from Ontario into Manitoba, expanding his role as a key figure in Canadian organized crime. According to journalist Anita Arvast, Mushy wasn't just a street thug. He was polished, athletic, and coldly calculating. Long dark hair tied in a ponytail, glasses with refined wire frames, and a calm, powerful presence made him someone you didn't cross. His home life was as complex as his public persona. One of his closest associates was Marcello Fatas Aravana, an MMA fighter who eventually became a key figure in one of Mushy's darkest chapters. The Shady Massacre, the Bandidos Massacre, a brotherhood, turns on itself. In April 2006, Canada was shaken by one of the most gruesome organized crime killings in its history. The Bandidos Massacre, also known as the Shady Massacre. 8 members of the Bandidos Motorcycle Club were executed at a rural farmhouse in Ontario. At the center of the carnage stood a man feared even among criminals, Dwight Big D Mushy. Mushy, already known in Winnipeg's underworld, wasn't a man prone to empty threats. His reputation for violence was not built on rumors, it was earned. While many of his biker peers were notorious for exaggeration and fantasy, Mushy's skills as a martial artist and alleged hitman gave his name real weight. Rising tensions and fractures in the club. By early 2005, Mushy was expanding his empire. He had become co-owner of a Winnipeg nightclub and strip bar, and was recruited into the city's Bandidos chapter by its leader, Michael Sandom. But from the beginning, Mushy distrusted Sandom, a man he later mockingly called Little Beaker, instead of his preferred nickname, Taz. On June 25, 2005, Mushy accompanied Sandom to a remote farmhouse outside Iona Station, Ontario, where they first met Wayne Kellestain, a volatile and heavily armed man who would later play a central role in the massacre. Their goal was to meet with Giovanni Muscadere, the national president of the Bandidos Canada, but tensions quickly surfaced. Muscadere denied their request for full charter status, citing unpaid dues and doubts about the Winnipeg crew's loyalty. To Mushy, it was a snub, a sign the national leadership never truly respected the Winnipeg chapter. A second meeting followed on November 26, 2005, in Toronto. Once again, Muscadere refused to elevate the Winnipeg chapter, deepening the divide. Mushy left frustrated, viewing the leadership as elitist and out of touch. Drugs, distrust, and dangerous moves. By January 2006, Mushy was making power plays of his own. He traveled to Vancouver and purchased a kilogram of cocaine, as well as ephedrine, a precursor chemical used to manufacture meth. This was a direct violation of club policy. Musacre had banned meth dealing, but Mushy, along with Sandham and Kellenstein, saw profit and power in breaking the rules. Around the same time, disturbing information surfaced. A Winnipeg chapter member, identified only as JB, presented Mushy with a news article indicating that Sandham was a former police officer. A stunning revelation in outlaw biker culture, where ties to law enforcement are considered unforgivable. But Mushy shrugged it off, either in denial or believing it was a case of mistaken identity. In March 2006, Mushy and Sandham traveled together again, this time to Peace Arch Park, a neutral zone straddling the US-Canada border. Outlaw bikers frequently used this park for discreet cross-border meetings, as many had criminal records preventing legal travel. The goal? Patch things up with American Bandidos leadership. But the meeting changed nothing. The schism between the Winnipeg faction and national leadership had grown too wide to bridge. Prelude to mass murder. On March 25, 2006, the final plot took shape. A meeting at Mushy's house brought the plan into the open. Sandham announced that he, Mushy, and 3 others would travel to Ontario to pull the patches of the No Surrender crew, Musacre's faction. It was a euphemism. Stripping men of their patches meant excommunication and possibly death. Mushy, usually vocal and brash, was eerily quiet that day. Something was different. They arrived at Wayne Kellenstein's farmhouse in rural Ontario. He hadn't been informed they were coming, but he welcomed them anyway. The stage was set. On April 1st, the group made a public appearance at the Holland House restaurant in Iona Station. According to the restaurant's owner, Mushy stood out as the clear leader, calm, in control, and paying the bill. In contrast, Kellenstein's bodyguard, Frank Mather, was visibly on edge. April 7th, 2006. The Shady Massacre. A mandatory church meeting, club code for a gathering of members, was called at Kellenstein's farm. The No Surrender crew, unaware of what awaited them, complied. Inside the farmhouse, weapons were gathered. Sandham selected a .303 Lee Enfield rifle. Mushy chose a shotgun, sawing off the barrel in Kellenstein's garage to make it more lethal at close range. A chilling sign that the violence was premeditated. He wore surgical gloves, taping leather gloves over them to avoid leaving prints. That night, 8 men were murdered in cold blood. It was Canada's worst mass killing tied to organized crime, a calculated slaughter disguised as an internal club purge. The victims included National President Giovanni Musacre, National Sergeant-at-Arms Paul Sinopoli, and several others loyal to the No Surrender faction. Their bodies were later found crammed into vehicles abandoned in a farmer's field near the town of Shedden. The Bandidos Massacre exposed the dark underbelly of outlaw biker culture, infighting, greed, betrayal, and unchecked violence. At its center stood Dwight Big D Mushy, a man whose intimidating presence once ruled Winnipeg's criminal scene, and whose actions helped script one of Canada's most shocking crime stories, the night of the massacre. As night fell on April 7, 2006, Dwight Big D Mushy took his position beside Wayne Kellenstein, armed and ready. The plan was no longer a theory. It was in motion. Around 10 p.m., the unsuspecting No Surrender crew, led by Bandidos National President Giovanni Musacre, arrived at Kellenstein's barn for what they believed was a mandatory meeting. It was a trap. Michael Sandham fired first, killing Luis Chopper Raposo, the national treasurer, with a shot from his rifle. Chaos erupted. Mushy burst into the barn, wielding a sawed-off shotgun. As panic spread, George Crash Krayarakis and Paul Big Paulie Sinopoli attempted to flee, only to be gunned down by Kellenstein outside. With the group subdued, Kellenstein ordered Mushy to stand guard over the remaining hostages. Though armed, Mushy made no move to stop what unfolded next. One by one, Kellenstein executed the members of the No Surrender crew. Mushy watched it all, unflinching, silent, detached. Outside the barn, Paul Sinopoli, Michael Little Mikey Trotta, and Frank the Bammer Salerno were each gunned down. In his final moments, Salerno shook Mushy's hand, pleading with him to think of his newborn son, Mario. It was a brief flash of humanity, quickly extinguished. The final victim was Jamie Goldberg Flans. Sandham tried to execute him, but botched the shot. Flans lay in agony. Mushy stepped in. He tested Sandham's weapon to confirm it wasn't jammed, then calmly shot Flans between the eyes. The escape and aftermath. In the early hours of April 8th, Mushy and Sandom fled the scene in a Pontiac Grand Prix, stolen from one of the victims. The bodies were stuffed into abandoned vehicles and dumped in a farmer's field near Shedden, Ontario. Before leaving, Mushy mocked Sandom's incompetence, particularly his failure to kill Flans. One witness later recalled that Mushy had remarked how Head & Shoulders shampoo was excellent for removing gunshot residue, a chilling example of his calculating mindset. What made Mushy's involvement even more brazen was that he was already on bail for a meth conspiracy charge. One of his conditions required him to inform authorities if he left Manitoba. True to form, Mushy complied, officially notifying law enforcement of his trip to Ontario. But he said nothing of its deadly purpose. When the bodies were discovered, Mushy quickly became a key suspect. The turncoat and the wire Mushy's downfall came from within. A fellow Winnipeg Bandido, known only as MH, was secretly working with police. He had been wearing a wire. On April 14th, just a week after the massacre, MH agreed to become a fully cooperating informant. His testimony and the recordings he made would seal Mushy's fate. By May 7th, MH had officially become an agent informer. His tapes captured Mushy expressing open disdain for Sandom, mocking his failures during the killings. In one disturbing conversation, Mushy recalled Flans's wide eyes, noting how the man seemed as if he wanted to say something before Mushy pulled the trigger. Meanwhile, tensions between Mushy and Sandom escalated further. In a bizarre twist, Sandom began impersonating Mushy in emails, praising himself in third person in a pathetic attempt to boost his reputation. Mushy was disgusted. MH continued recording. In one conversation, Mushy scoffed at Sandom's claims of taking part in the executions, saying, "He's probably claiming all the glory." Regarding Musidur's death, Mushy commented with an odd sense of respect. "This guy, he went out like a man. Arrest and trial." By June 2006, Mushy was increasingly vocal. On June 13th, when MH suggested that Sandham was building an alibi at the group's expense, Mushy responded, "If he did that, he's an idiot. The three of us should go talk to him." 2 days later, he never got the chance. On June 15th, Mushy was arrested at his home and charged with 7 counts of first-degree murder. Authorities later revealed they believed Mushy was planning additional murders, prompting a swift arrest. Justice and the code. At his 2009 trial, Mushy made no effort to hide his contempt for co-conspirator Wayne Kellestein. Reports suggested that Mushy had beaten Kellestein in jail, punishing him for being captured so easily. During the trial, he continued to taunt him. At one point, Kellestein's lawyer claimed Mushy pressed a threatening note against the glass of their cells. "You're a dead man." Mushy's lawyer, Michael Moon, tried to cast his client as a reluctant participant, pointing out that Mushy had to take heart medication during the killings to avoid a heart attack. But few bought the argument. As journalist Peter Edwards observed, it was hard to picture the stoic, lethal Mushy as a victim of circumstance. Just before the trial concluded, Mushy fired Moon, along with another accused, Marcello Aravina. The outlaw biker code was clear: don't rat. Moon's strategy of blaming Kellestein and Sandom risked painting Mushy as a traitor. Mushy chose to represent himself. The verdict and legacy. On October 29, 2009, the jury returned its verdict, guilty on all 7 counts of first-degree murder. As he was led away, Mushy bowed politely to the jury, a final act that could be seen as respect, irony, or defiance. Today, Dwight Big D Mushy is serving a life sentence at Stony Mountain Penitentiary in Manitoba with no chance of parole. His name remains forever tied to one of Canada's darkest moments, a massacre that exposed the brutal, fractured reality of outlaw biker culture.